threat actors from Cuba are distributing a new form of ransomware.
So, John, tell us about this Cuba ransomware breaching some critical U.S. infrastructure.
So FBI actually put out a alert flash bulletin about this within the past week or so, basically indicating that, whether it's state-sponsored Cuba, I'm not sure, but coming out of Cuba, there is a ransomware gang that is or has compromised roughly 49 organizations so far, some of those in U.S. critical infrastructure sectors. So the primary sectors targeted are financial, government, healthcare, manufacturing, information technology sectors in terms of like who they were targeting with this ransomware. To date, at the time of the article, they've demanded as much as $74 million. So they've compromised, enough people to ask for $74 million in total from those victims, and they've received roughly $44 million from those victims. So more than half of what they're, seeking has been actually paid out to them so far. So fairly successful in terms of, the take that they're getting here. A few details about this ransomware. It's being distributed using Hanseater, which is a malware kind of dropper component. It's kind of one of those initial dropper types of malware payloads. And once that's on there, it will deploy any number of things. So they've been seen dropping Pony and Ficker, which are password sealers. And more recently, they've dropped Cobalt Strike on there. Which, we've probably talked on the show about Cobalt Strike. It's increased in popularity a lot as a remote access Trojan that a lot of bad actors are using. It's got a lot of stealthy capabilities. It's also got a lot of capabilities built into it. So I think that's why they've been using it a lot. In terms of the initial compromise, from what they're indicating, it's usually they will phish the target company with an email trying to get credentials. So they'll phish with something that makes it look like, maybe a company login page or something as an interstitial, and try to harvest their login credentials. And then they'll do some things to either exploit them using Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, which we know there's been a couple of those recently. I think you need to be authenticated, which is probably why they need those credentials to do that. Or they'll try to break into that enterprise using remote desktop protocol with those credentials. So they'll try to find, some open remote desktops that are, internet facing, and then try to log in with those stolen credentials on those devices. Once they get that on there, they get the ransomware deployed. And you can kind of tell that you've got this particular ransomware if when it encrypts all your files, it will, rename them with a .cuba extension. So maybe you have, 2021 budget.docx as your Word file. It'll now be 2021 budget.docx.cuba. And it'll be an encrypted file that unless you pay them, they won't give you the key to unlock it. Something to be wary of, I would say. FBI, you can find this flash bulletin, publicly accessible on the internet. And FBI is asking anybody who does, get impacted by this to reach out to them so that they have some good reporting, because they're kind of trying to track this one pretty closely in terms of the number of victims and the victimology, going on there. So, I mean, that's the basic nutshot. I don't know if you had any thoughts from what you had heard, Andy.
Yeah, the amount of money that they've made is astonishingly high. It's massive. I mean, $44 million is quite a lot of money. I guess a question I have is, sometimes with ransomware groups, they'll ask for the ransom, in exchange for the decryption key, and then they'll get their money, and then they'll give you a bogus key, or they just won't give you a key or something like that. So given how much money they've already made, I mean, I don't know if the article goes into it, but do you know if they've been operating in good faith, so to speak, where they receive payment and they do actually provide that decryption key, or they stiffen people?
They did not really discuss that I saw in what I had read so far.
I think given how much money they've made, it implies that they are, because it's the sort of thing where if a number of agencies or organizations are compromised in this manner and they're getting stiffed, typically you'll hear that in the news that people are paying and they're not getting their files decrypted, at least. So I guess a good question to ask would be, what can you do from an enterprise perspective, from an individual's perspective, to sort of protect yourself from ransomware in general, if not the Cuba ransomware?
One of the things we've seen pretty historically over the past couple of years here is exposed remote desktop protocol, servers like Windows servers or workstations exposed to the internet is a really bad idea. Even if you think it's got a really good, strong password on it, I would still strongly recommend against it. I think a very high percentage, I don't have statistics of this, but a very high percentage of ransomware victims have been compromised because of a remote desktop workstation that's been exposed to the internet. It was brute force password guessed into, or they stole the credentials, like in this case, and they were able to get in that way to it. And then from there, they were able to, extend themselves or into the company network and, compromise additional assets and whatnot. So, for sure, I would have a really strong, try to have a strong policy around that, because that can be a really high risk there. Additionally, I think most companies should have a really good backup and disaster recovery policy in place, and then try to exercise that on some semi-regular basis, so that, if you do get hit with one of these things, that you do have backups and that you'll be able to recover from them, so that maybe you don't have to pay that ransom that they're asking for. One other thing that I was thinking about is, and they didn't mention this in the article either, but we know a lot of groups lately, ransomware groups, in addition to extorting for unlocking or the decryption key for all of the stuff that they've encrypted, some of them are taking the documents, the cherry picking or getting a lot of the useful stuff, and then extorting the company as well, saying we're going to publish this information to the internet, maybe like a data breach. Let's say it's a company that has a large customer base, and they were able to get in and extract a lot of the data from their customer data, into a big data dump. They might also extort them for that, saying, well, we're going to release this or we're going to sell it unless you also pay us, this amount. So, that's this double extortion ransomware type of event that's been going on lately. They don't mention that, whether that's in play here or not, but just another thing to be, concerned about, especially if you get impacted by this kind of thing or any other ransom.
Right. Well, we've heard of that happen in the past, where an actor will say, pay us or we'll sell your data, and then they get paid, and then they also sell the data. So you kind of, it's like a double scam a little bit. I think specifically too with this particular ransomware, the initial vector is phishing emails. It's hard to protect against that, just because human error comes into play. It's hard to train every single person in your organization to have a keen eye for what a legitimate email looks like and what an illegitimate email looks like. But I think just to add to the list of recommendations that we would have, one of them would be to do email filtering, employ a service or some sort of tool to go in and sandbox things in emails and go out, and if the email contains a link, sandbox it and go pull whatever it is down and then analyze its behavior. That is kind of a lot to ask, but it's important to do those things to protect your organization. And then another thing is just awareness. Just train employees, teach people what a legitimate email looks like, and the telltale signs of an illegitimate one. Look at the email domain. Keep an eye out for signs of social engineering, urgency, reward, fear, things like that. And then, of course, look for easy things like misspellings or otherwise errors in grammar or things like that. So for the Cuba ransomware specifically, with its initial vector, I think those are some pretty good recommendations. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean
that's really good. I can't believe I forgot to mention those. So that's really good. Both points are really excellent. And you actually made me think of another thing. This is kind of like a deep track tip, so to speak.
Okay.
If you're like a security incident responder looking for phishing type phish sites that might be delivered through email or even otherwise, however they come up. One thing I've noticed, and this is, your mileage may vary with this greatly, but it's not necessarily a bad tip. A lot of these bad actors, when they generate their phish site, sometimes they will include the assets for your company logo, perhaps, directly from your website. So now when the victim loads this phishing site, let's say it's like badfish.com, on that HTML, it's actually going to go fetch from yourcompany.com the logo, let's say, to show it on the page. And when it does that, you could go look at your web logs over at yourcompany.com for somebody fetching that logo where the referrer in the headers, which will be in the HTTP headers, is something other than your website, So it'll, in that case, it's going to say badfishsite.com or whatever it was, is who was the page that they were on when they were trying to fetch this logo. So that's a good tip in terms of like finding phish sites that people might be targeting against your corporation. And people probably already know this. But as security responders, we see, like, especially the lazy bad actors who generate phish sites and don't, think enough to just make a copy of the file over to their own phish site, like the logo or whatever, and are actually importing those assets from third-party websites like your own company website. That's a good way to find potential new phish sites.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a great call out. That's a great way to detect the lazy ones, I guess. I mean, there's tools out there that let you clone sites, and it's easy. I mean, you can do it in 2-3 lines, 2-3 commands, and you got yourself a cloned site. But as you mentioned, in doing so, you're sort of leaving a trail back to what you're doing. So I don't want to give fraudsters any tips or anything, but I think that's a great call out, John.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's all I really had to talk about on that one. And just people, be aware. And if you see, if you're impacted by this, please reach out to FBI Cyber Squad and let them know if you're able to, so that they have some good accounting of like who's being targeted and to what degree. So keep track of this.
Yeah, it's a good, interesting story, John. Thanks for sharing.
All right. Thanks.